Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy TV. I'm Brant Lewis, and tonight we are joined by cartoonist Dan Schkade. Dan, who you may know from Lavender Jack, along with his current run on Flash Gordon, but most of all, he has asked the important questions such as what if Batman was inspired by a goat, and what if Magneto was defeated by Saul Goodman in X Men 200? Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Mhm. Great. So to kind of kick things off, let's start up with a couple little warm-up questions.
I'm ready. I'm set. Let's do it.
Okay. If you were trapped on a deserted island and you could only bring one music album with you, what would it be and why?
I think it would probably be Talking Heads Stop Making Sense uh, because it's good for work, social engagements, or if you're having a breakdown, which I don't know how much social engagements I'll have on the island, but I'll be ready. And the breakdown's going to happen.
Truly, and it's also one of the best live albums of all time as well.
100%.
Mhm. So what's a creative hobby that you have that other people might not know about?
Uh, I truly don't have any creative hobbies that people don't know about. Everything that I do with my professional and free time goes right on the internet. I would love to say I do, jujitsu classes or I'm secretly into needlepoint, but the only thing approaching a hobby I have is uh, going out real late at night and trying to make friends and not enemies at my local dive bars. And I hope my fans don't know about that, actually.
Totally fair. So what's that under the radar project that you worked on that you feel that needs more attention?
Well, obviously, I want everybody to read Flash Gordon. I'm really proud of what we're doing with that strip. Um, and oh, I'm sorry. Is this an undersung project of of mine or just in general?
Just in general of anything they worked on.
Oh, that's embarrassing. Um, so a project a lot of people know about this already, but I just finished a show that I love so much, and I love all the shows put out by this producer couple of Robert Michelle King. But I just finished Evil, which was such a
Yeah.
unique show. It had so much personality, so much imagination. It carved out a world for itself that was both completely of itself, but also fit perfectly onto our everyday life. And it's a show that did end well with its fourth season, but I could also watch 12 seasons of it. Um, as many people as saw it, I wish three times that many people saw it because it's one of the most special pieces of television we've had in a long time.
I fully agree with that. I mean, I love The Good Fight, I love The Good Wife, and Evil also has Michael Emerson, who, what's not to love?
Nothing.
Exactly. So, what's a favorite comic of yours that you feel doesn't get enough love or other people might not know about?
Oh man, there's a comic that I just adore, uh, and like I say, this isn't a super deep cut that people do know about it, but I can't stop recommending Paul Grist's Jack Staff to people. Jack Staff, it's it's like Astro City but for British comics. It's all the characters are pastiches of long running British characters, especially the Marvel British comics. Um, and the format of the series is that it's a long sequence of individual characters solo series that get linked together into a long narrative. It's so like it sounds like such a complex concept, but Paul Grist's storytelling is so lean. His cartooning is so like deceptively simple and dynamic that you just find yourself toppling through it. Uh, it's crunchy, it's actiony, it's sometimes surprisingly heartfelt, and it never stays in one place for very long. Jack Staff, uh, 10 times out of 10, that's my recommendation.
Okay, I have to go check that out then. That sounds really fascinating.
It is. It's worth the nickel.
Gotcha. So, what's a comic or a story that you worked on that you feel especially proud of doing?
Well, uh, like I said when I erroneously asked your earlier question, I am really proud of what's going on with Flash Gordon. I think that um, uh, I'm very happy with the audience that we've built with that so far. Obviously, people were enjoying Flash before, but the new group of people who maybe weren't used to newspaper comics, who weren't used to the pace of them, are finding something in Flash's super condensed storytelling structure that seems to be interesting, that seems to be alluring, and so I'm really proud of being able to bring readers who maybe didn't read any newspaper comics into reading Flash. And then from Flash, they check out like Randy Mulholland's Popeye. They check out and even all the great stuff King Features has to offer, like Mark Trail, and but then beyond that into stuff like the great stuff they're doing with Gil Thorpe right now. Anyway, I'm very proud of that, um, and I'm also very proud that after after we finished our run on the Spirit, this would have been 2016, I think. Um, Matt Wagner, Brendan Wagner, and I came back together to do a single Spirit page that went in "Love Is Love," which was an anthology to benefit the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting. Um, and the page we did for that, it was like our attempt to do a one-page Will Eisner themed like a musical about love. It was so hokey and earnest. Brennan did such a good job with it. I loved Matt's script for it. I'm very, very proud to have been involved in that project.
I remember reading that issue when it came out, and I think that may have actually been my introduction to your work, which then led me to obviously your Britain and yours run on the Spirit, which was a lot of fun.
Well, if that was your introduction to me, I am thrilled. I can think of no better entryway, so it makes me very happy. And of course, doing the Spirit with Brennan and Matt was amazing. It was uh, the the biggest break of my early career.
Mhm. Okay, so let's turn back the dial a bit in your history and talk a bit about your childhood. Were you a comics kid? What kind of made you decide to become a cartoonist?
Well, I was definitely a comics kid. I was pretty solitary. I was an only child, kind of growing up in a not a remote area, but there weren't a lot of other people around. Um, and I just got lost in the worlds of comics. Um, I would get them from this half price books near my orthodontist, where they would have non consecutive issues of things. I'd be getting like an issue of Web of Spider-Man, um, and also like black and white boom comics, like issues of Courageous Man and like the original Grindles and whatnot. So I was getting this whole spread of the universes that comic books contained without being able to get the whole story. So there's something so charismatic about that. I think that's probably what I like about Jack Staff is how you were getting these windows into these worlds and the potential of them, the potential of the stories they contained just seemed infinite. But as opposed to movies or video games, um, comics felt like something you can actually do. It felt tangible and immediate. Like you can be 10 and read a Steve Ditko Doctor Strange and then go right to drawing Doctor Strange, like copying him from the book, and now you've drawn him a drawing that is just as real as what you saw in the book. And so I think the potential of those narrative spaces, but also the tangibility of being able to actually make it, I was completely hooked on that.
Most definitely. And honestly, reading Grindel at a young age definitely makes a lot of sense with your work, whether it be with the writing and art, with that very kind of pulpy type of classic feel.
Oh, definitely. I mean, uh, Devil by the Deed, the original. I was going to say the original Grendel story. That's not quite true. Devil by the Deed being a contemporary retelling of the original Grendel stories, um, was such an eye opener to me. I that much character and drama and the scope, the rise and fall of Hunter Rose's empire could be contained in one slim volume. Like it was the coolest thing ever for me. And of course, Matt uh, also co-created potentially my favorite comic ever, which is Sandman Mystery Theater, with Guy Davis and then
Yes.
later with Steve Siegel. And I'm also just a fan of Matt's. Like, I love the Dark Moon Rising duo of Batman miniseries that he did, Batman and the Monster Men and Batman and the Mad Monk. I'm just a big fan of Matt's. His storytelling is so. Uh, it's his narrative decisions are always motivated by how best to sell a particular moment, and if that means a splash page, that's what it means. If it means a 24 panel page, that's what it means. Maybe we're doing silhouette, maybe we're doing moment to moment, maybe we're doing narrative driven captions. Like, the plasticity of his storytelling is so cool to me. And so obviously it was an incredible thrill for me to work with him directly on the Spirit, to actually see, not only to see the other side of the curtain, see what his scripts are like, but also to work with him directly. I would go to his studio every week and show him the pencils, and um, he would take out the light box and show me different ways that I could lay it out, ways to save time, ways to punch it up. Real basic things like, if you're going to show somebody crashing through a window, you need to draw 50% more glass than there would actually be in order to make it feel, you know, like you're actually witnessing that explosion of sharp shards. Um, but it all goes back to reading that original Grendel and Sandman Mystery Theater, and Faces and all Matt's other great comics from the 80s, 90s, and today. That like he remains the kind of cartoonist I hope that I can be and am becoming.
So, since you do both writing and drawing, what did you gravitate towards first?
Well, um, I, I definitely think of myself as a writer that learned to draw. I knew from a pretty, I would say, a fairly early age. I knew, like, by the time, like, I was in middle school, I could feel that I had a ceiling in terms of technical ability. Like, I knew I wasn't going to be able to be one of these guys that can draw a cityscape, like one of these amazing Gene Ha, Eminem style cityscapes. Nor would I be this stellar anatomist. Um, and I think that's part of why I gravitated towards uh, cartoonists like Matt, but also Mike Mignola, Frank Miller. um, uh, Paul Grist, and Tim Sale. These guys, these men and women who are able to suggest things through shape and juxtaposition rather than through direct representational art. Because I had these stories I wanted to tell. At every point, everything I write, like you're witnessing the like me redlining my technical drawing ability, trying to create these things that I have in my head. Um, so definitely the story came first, and then the art is always trying to catch up.
Most definitely. And I think, honestly, those are some great examples with Tim Sale, Paul Grist, and of course Mike Mignola, because so much of the beauty of their work comes from their distillation of what is necessary and also what fits the mood and the tone of the story and their version of reality, which is obviously in your work as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so now moving on to your creator series. So obviously, the biggest one, Lavender Jack, which ran about 3 years, got nominated for a Ringo, I believe.
Yes, and Ringo, and also an Eisner.
Mhm.
But
So
who's
talk a
counting?
little bit about how that. Yeah, some people count about that stuff. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the genesis of that and kind of like what made you decide to go with a web comic.
Well, I always liked web comics. In fact, I just went to Daniel Corsetto is running the 20th anniversary Girls with Slingshots collection in a tour around the East Coast and the Midwest. So I just went to a stop of hers and picked up a massive collection of that. I was, religiously in high school, checking out the new Girls with Slingshots back in the real like uh, I think probably the golden age of those newspaper style web comics. Every day a 3 or 4 panel strip. Um, the there's a real direct way of interacting with the audience that comes from web comics that I always liked, and I cut my teeth posting um, uh, comics to the internet with the series I did in high school, the Private Files of the Fowl. Um, so flash forward, I'm working on the Spirit, and we're nearing the end of our 12 issue run, and I'm kind of looking ahead to what comes next. And a couple years prior, I had written this short story um, that was it was just like a Jeeves and Wooster style dialogue between an aristocrat and his maid, and it's just Mimley and Ducky. It's the main characters from Lavender Jack, just them like talking through a mystery, and it was kind of funny and it was kind of pithy, and um, but those characters were really crystalline right away, and so as I was looking for what was going to happen after the Spirit, I went back to that short story, and I think I was watching Mr. Selfridge or Downton Abbey or something, and I thought, well, what if we took this like Bertie Wooster, but he's Batman character, and like built a whole series around him. Like, what if we extrapolated from that and built a world that could accommodate that character? Um, and I had done a kind of gnarly, gritty, very early 20s angsty Private Eye series with San Hannibal. So I thought, oh, let's swing in the other direction. Let's have it be fancy and perfumed and kind of femme, and with people, talking in these roundabout ways, and saying words like crepuscular. Um, and so it just went from there. I built out a pitch. I had Brendan. I tasked Brendan Wagner with coloring some like little character portraits I had done, and I shopped it around. and it didn't get it got pretty far at a couple publishers, but didn't end up getting picked up. But while it was being shopped around, an editor saw it who went on to work at Webtoon, and so I pitched it to her again there, and she went to bat for it and got it picked up. So all of a sudden, I was doing web comics again, and I'm glad I did, because I would have gotten 6, maybe 12 issues if I'd gone traditionally with it. If I'd done it with like a floppy publisher, um, but by doing it in Webtoon, I ended up doing it for years. There's like, if you format Lavender Jack into comic book pages, it's about 1,000 pages long. I've done the math on it, and no shot do I get 1,000 pages at Image, not in 2015. So I really feel like I got lucky there by getting a chance to team up with a publisher that was willing to give me that much runway, especially a publisher based in a country that did COVID really well. So there wasn't any interruption in being able to work for them. That was very, very fortunate for me. So yeah, that's Lavender Jack. It was something that began just out of a little like 300-word pen portrait, um, that I grew into a whole series with a couple of lucky breaks along the way.
So, kind of going off what you mentioned with it being over 1,000 pages long, what is the difference with formatting a story for a webcomic compared to a traditional 6 issue arc?
I think specifically with Webtoon, Webtoon's a different animal from any other comic format, because if you're doing a web comic, it can still be a traditionally formatted thing. Like, there are a lot of great comics like Dicebox that Jen Manley Lee, who was my colorist on Lavender Jack, she's been doing a web comic for ages. That you could easily just compile into a floppy. All the great comics John Allison has done. Um, what's different with Webtoon is that it's a vertical scroll, so you're only ever seeing one panel at a time. Your horizontal space is strictly restricted, and so it starts to take on more of the format of film, where you're editing within one frame, as opposed to a comic where you know you're keeping the whole page in mind when you're doing any one panel. And so that extends to the pacing of the story. Now all of a sudden, we're not getting 5 panels at a time, we're getting 40 panels at a time. So how does each week's chunk of 40 panels work in concert with each other? How is their narrative arc within that one episode? How does it feel like a satisfying morsel by the time you get to the end of it? Um, it's just different storytelling priorities that all kind of inform each other.
Mm-hmm. And kind of going along with that, because obviously most floppies are about 22 pages. And that's usually a monthly issue, and the fact that you were doing this on a weekly basis, right?
Yeah, every week was about, um, like, if we assume a normal comic book page is 5 panels, I was doing 40 panels a week. So that's what, 8 pages, right? So I
Yeah.
was doing essentially 32 pages a month.
Wow. And how was that with your previous workload and structure?
I mean, it's a real grind. It was a real tough job. Um, and I had some editors that were very patient with me. Jen Manley Lee was a very good collaborator, very flexible. Because on top of it being a lot of panels, Lavender Jack is also just a really dense story. There's a bunch of characters. There's a lot of sort of interweaving mysteries. Um, there's a lot of dialogue. Like it's real. It's just hard to make. I mean, the webtoon, your general webtoons are a lot sparser than Lavender Jack. Like what they do with 40 panels is they just cover less ground than I do, which isn't which is not to say that that's inferior, because you look at comics like Lore Olympus or Let's Play, like these things have moved, like they've got millions of viewers. They're New York Times bestsellers when they're put in print. So I'm not casting aspersions on that at all. I'm merely saying that like the production model was designed for people who were doing less involved work than I was doing. And of course I'm not just drawing it like I was on the Spirit. I was drawing it, writing it, lettering it. Um, I had Jen coloring, fortunately. But yeah, no, it was a lot of work, and it was grinding. We did 3 seasons, we did three years on it, and I'm very proud of the work we did. But I, if I was going to do another webtoon, I would make something simpler than Lavender Jack, because it was just too much for me alone to do, and if I couldn't do it in my late 20s, I definitely couldn't do it again in my 30s.
Most definitely. And I think 3 years of story, that's quite the feat as well, especially compared to most traditional print comics, which can't even get a full year sometimes.
Which is a real shame. I mean, when I look at 80s series, like the 80s vigilante series, who like the Adrian Chase vigilante series, or even things like The Question, like neither of those things would have gotten the runs back then that they got today. And they were given a lot of time to experiment and find their footing. And it is a shame that other books, like I think about David Walker and Ramon Villalobos's Nighthawk from a couple of years ago. I could have read 20 issues of that, and I would have loved to have seen what they could have done with that runway. So yeah, that was another thing I feel very fortunate about with Lavender Jack. That, I mean, those first, what would have been the first 6 issues of that, um, are good story, good comics, but the stuff we were able to do later in the series, the stuff with our version of World War I, the sort of complex secret identity stuff we got involved with in season two, it just would have been a shame to not get to do that. And it makes me think, like, what other things are we not getting to see because other creators aren't given that same runway?
Most definitely. And the last question about Lavender Jack, and I imagine with it being a webtoon as well, it was also a way of have your work be exposed and introduced to a new audience that may not be fans of traditional comics or go to the more traditional comic stores and all that.
Oh yeah, no, I was not prepared. When the first episode of Lavender Jack dropped, um, about an hour after it was released, I looked at it on the app, and I said, "Oh my god, it's got 20 comments already." Well, I didn't realize, like, I'm coming at it from traditional comics, where like you maybe get a couple reviews and some tweets. Um, Even if you're doing a big book, you don't necessarily get a lot of engagement with it. But here was a comic where, like, on the lean weeks throughout its whole run, I was still getting like 100 comments an episode. Um, like as a lower performing webtoon, I still had a massive audience. We had 100,000 subscribers. Um, and something I was always really proud of is the Lavender Jack audience. They were really smart. They were really engaged. There were a lot of people who weren't used to what we call Western style comics, that weren't familiar with like mid to early 20th century cartooning that I draw from pretty heavily, and weren't used to drawing room mysteries, like turn of the century mystery stories. So there were a lot of people who were coming to that stuff fresh and really really digging into it, really studying it. Um, Something I was always really proud of is, um, the normal uh, engagement rate on the internet is about 1 to 10. Like for every 10 people consuming a piece of online media, one will leave a comment, share, like, what have you. According to some of the metrics that I was able to see, the view counts I was able to see with Webtoon, Lavender Jack had an engagement rate of like 25 to 30%. Like, people were so engaged with it. So it's like, despite it having a smaller audience, the people who were reading it were really reading it. And yeah, I was proud of that for myself, but I was also just, I don't know. I don't know if this is cool to say, but I was just proud of this audience. I was proud to see so many like smart, plugged in, like empathetic people all in one place. Like if somebody ever came in and was saying, nasty stuff, like, antisocial stuff, transphobic stuff, anything like that, they got jumped immediately. Like it was I was not involved in the comment section. That comment section regulated itself really well. And I do think that it's the comic attracted those people. I think that Lavender Jack kind of got the readership it deserves, um, which not every comic gets. There are some lovely comics made by great people that attract people that they wish they wouldn't. That's just the nature of the beast. But Lavender Jack, I don't know. That was a real special readership experience.
Most definitely. And then after that, you went back to print comics with St. John that you worked on with your collaborator, Bryn Wagner.
That's right. Yeah. Brennan Brennan approached me about creating a comic for Portland Gear, a Portland-based apparel company, streetwear, really nice, fresh, clean stuff. Um, and it was just kind of a funny concept, a superhero for a clothing company, and Marcus, the owner of Portland Gear, wanted it to be a hero not just for their company but for Portland, emblematic of Portland's values. And I've done advertising work in the past. I used to do design work for key art for Lego video games, and I worked for other like corporate clients like that. Um, but Brent and I, put our heads together and we're like, well, let's try and make something. I don't know, like let's not approach it like an ad job. Let's approach it like we're making a comic. And we came up with Saint John, which I think, um, it was really great to reunite with him on that, to write something with him, which is cool. It's cool to, um, you know be involved in a different kind of comic with different narrative priorities. Lavender Jack, was a very talkative mystery series, and Flash is very sort of propulsive and breathless. Saint John is a little more. I mean, it's a comic about people walking around, and it's more reflective, and it's more, emblematic of Brennan's connection to Portland. So yeah, it's a fun, cool comic, cool series.
It's very introspective, I think is the word that I would describe
I like
it.
that.
Mhm. I totally forgot. You moved to Portland for a bit, right?
Yeah, I lived in Portland for about 7 years. I moved there to get into comics because LA hadn't become a comic book
Hmm.
town yet, and I knew I couldn't hack New York.
Yeah, and I think that's also very interesting with St. John as well is the fact that with Portland being one of the major comic hubs, because outside of Emerald City Comic Con, Dark Horse is also stationed there as well too. So is that also kind of a reason with the Portland gear aspect as well to set it in the city?
I think there's definitely an element of that. Portland is such a big comic town because on top of Dark Horse, you have Oni Press, you have the comic book collective Helioscope that I was also a member of. You have so many creators living there. I mean, it's kind of mind boggling. There is a point in the early 2000s where everybody working on Batman lived in Portland. Like not the Batman title, I mean Batman Detective Comics, Shadow of the Bat, like all of that, all of those books. Um, so it's just a town with comics, like in the same way that Detroit has music, Portland has comics. It's just in the DNA. Um, so we definitely tapped into that for the series. All of our variant covers, um, which have been Matt Wagner, Brennan, Steve Lieber, um, Caitlin Yardsky, and Layla Del Duca. I believe that's all of the variant covers we have. They're all people who live in Portland. Um, and Brennan's from there. He grew up in Portland. He grew up in West Lynn. Um, and so, and Brennan also moved away for a while to live in New York, and he's since moved back to Portland. So we have Brennan, who went away and came back, and me, who lived there for a while and then left. So we have two different perspectives on the city that I feel like inform the story, because neither of us are really coming at it from the same direction. And by the way, I always try to mention this. Brennan was hugely influential in me getting the spirit. Brennan really went to bat for me. Um, when they were selecting the artist to draw the spirit, he and I did um, some small Dark Horse Presents projects leading up to that, that were largely greenlit because of his involvement. Yeah, Brennan is a guy that drops the ladder behind him, and there were several people who have benefited from Brennan going to bat for them. So I I'm incredibly talented. I'm really smart. I'm really good at what I do, but I will never pass up an opportunity to thank Brennan for you know being my for letting me be his plus one.
Yes, I could definitely see that in St. John with the Portland itself looking after each other, take care of each other, and the titular character being that spirit of care for the community and all that.
Absolutely. I mean, I moved to Portland in 2010, and that's an era a lot of people point to as when Portland started to change from the big small town that it had been up to that point to the like northernmost California city that some consider it to be today. Um, there was a neighborly aspect to it that was somewhat eroded over the last decade as new money came to town, new infrastructure, as the population boomed. So trying to do a story about reclaiming that community element, that what made Portland special, that gave it its spirit, was this spirit of not just community um, and mutual aid, but also celebrating what makes people different, like celebrating strangeness and specificity, um, celebrating history in a way that enriches us and doesn't bind us or restrict us. And Yeah, in our own small way, that was a something that we both wanted to do with this book.
And I think you'll succeeded.
Well, it's very kind. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so before we move on to Flash Gordon, I want to correct myself. I actually said forgot which I forgot which comic convention I said that was in Portland. It's in Seattle. ECC is in Seattle, not Portland. Do not attack me, Oregon fans. Do not attack me, Oregonites.
Well, I mean, for a lot of people in Portland, Emerald City is like the San Diego Comic Con of the Pacific Northwest. Um, when it comes to the Portland's biggest convention, used to be Stumptown, which was a wonderful, wonderful show. Stumptown isn't around anymore, but we do still have Rose City, which is a great show, and it's the show where I met my girlfriend of 7 years, Jackie Crofts. So I always have a warm
Wow.
feeling for Rose City.
Hmm. Yeah, I was supposed to go to Emerald City 2020, and the pandemic
Why
happened,
did
so I
something come
never.
up? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry about
exactly.
that.
I was like, all ready to go, got the tickets, got the flight, and it's like, oh, okay, guess I have to put this on hold. One
Whoops.
1 year, Monday, I'll get to go.
Oh, good
So
luck.
I know. Yeah. So Flash Gordon, your most current project, and honestly one of the oldest comic cartoon characters in history.
True.
So
Yeah.
were you a newspaper cartoon kid?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. I would cut out the comics I liked, and I would paste them in binders. I was voracious, like any comic I could find, any comic book, anything I could find. I would clip if there was a comic in like an ad in a magazine, I would clip that out. Um, I would clip out anything just had like a drawing of a superhero on it, like the logo of a plumbing company. I would anything vaguely comic book related, I would cut out. Um, and in fact, one of them that really sticks in my memory is there was a paper in Austin, Texas, where I grew up, called the Weekend XL. It was sort of an alternative paper, and they had their own alternative strips in it. And one of those strips was called Millennium Murder. Um, and it was sort of a more mature comic strip. And in that strip, there was a black and white panel where a guy is shot in the head. It's silhouette. We don't get any gory detail on it, but yeah, somebody puts a gun up to his head and fires. And as a kid, I thought, oh, you can get shot in the head. I just assumed the skull made that impossible, but no. Turns out that not only can you get shot in the head, people do. And but that was right next to Hagar the Horrible uh, in my book. So
Hmm.
yeah, I had a love of newspaper strips going way back, and I uh, definitely for cartoonists, throughout the 20th century, and for some of us still today, getting to do a newspaper comic is something of a brass ring.
Oh no, I fully agree because I remember being a kid doing similar thing with cutting out the newspaper strips, putting them in a little folder, keeping track, and I think that's really a lot of people's first time encountering comics or what a comic could be.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so different from. I mean, it seems silly to say, but it's so different from everything else in the paper. Like you're flipping through it, you see just walls and walls of words, and you could sit down and read them, of course, and the information would come into your head that way. But it's so um, it can be intimidating, especially if you're a kid or somebody who's not a particularly strong reader. Even the photographs that you see in the paper are devoid of context and are sometimes quite frightening, disturbing. And then you get to the funny pages, and it's immediate story. Like you go from zero to digesting whatever's happening in the strip in seconds, if that. And so I think that's why the funny pages, like it's so, I think that's why it attracts kids, but also adults. You know, uh, it's the nougaty filling of the newspaper.
It really is, and then you, on Sundays, when it comes to color as well, is very much like the marshmallows in a way of the Lucky Charms, if you will, in this analogy.
Well said. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember my dad would leave out the color Sunday pages on the breakfast table for me on Sundays. Um, and that's the thing. Also, people do have a very personal relationship to the funny pages. You know, it is something that is um, that's pretty universal. I mean, that's going away to a degree. You know, not everybody has newspapers around all the time. In fact, when I did started doing Flash, it was months and months before I even saw a physical copy of a strip I'd done, because there just isn't anywhere in my neighborhood that sells newspapers. Um, but anybody, our age and up, still grew up with newspapers around, and those are the comics that are in everybody's house. People know Batman, Spider-Man, what have you, and people might not immediately think of the Wizard of Id, but everybody has the Wizard of Id in their house because it's in the newspaper.
Oh, definitely, and I mean, one of the most iconic characters is Garfield, which is a comic strip character, or Dennis the Menace.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what's great about these enduring characters is the deep grooves they've carved in the cultural imagination. How one of those popular, like, off brand, bootleg decals there is, or the Calvin mudflap stickers.
Yes.
Um, there's things like there's this tribe. I wish I can remember where they are. That would paint the Phantom on their shields. Like the cultural impact of these characters, these international characters that have been around for in the case of Garfield, 50 years, or in the case of Flash Gordon, 90 years. It's just the number of physical pieces of paper that these things are on, and how widespread those are, just creates this. Yeah, it makes them very culturally important in a way that I find super cool.
Mhm. There's a beauty in its simplicity, but also a underlining complexity as well to it.
Well, and that's really the challenge with Flash Gordon is, you know, um, it's a big story, and we have a very small amount of real estate to tell it in. So how do you? Where I was struggling with how to, um, uh, where I was struggling with how to make sure that we're keeping it sparse enough that it can fit in with the rest of the comics, while also dense enough that you are getting the texture we want every day. Because you don't want to give up the simplicity of the comic strip, as you say, it's part of what's beautiful about it. But we're also not trying to do just any comic strip.
Oh, fully agree with that, and I think, that kind of goes on a nice little tangent with Flash Gordon itself because, in all honesty, he's not a character that I grew up with, and I mainly knew him because of the '80s movies with Sam Jones and Max von Sydow, along with the Queen songs. So, with kind of like approaching such a iconic character with over 90 years of history, how do you make him accessible to a modern audience that who may not know who Flash Gordon is while keeping that history intact?
Well, I'm right there with the people who don't know who Flash Gordon is. I really I wasn't that familiar with him growing up. My knowledge of him I would say that my knowledge of Flash Gordon before I tried out for this job was about on par with my knowledge of like the Catholic saints. Like I could name you a few, and what they represented, but even being a Catholic myself, I couldn't really tell you much more than that. I couldn't tell you what's in the different books of the Bible. So when I was asked to try out for Flash, kind of off the strength of Lavender Jack, that's what led to me being offered this. Offered the chance to try out for it. I mean, it was a bake off. I had to submit. I was working against other artists. I was given PDFs of the first like 10 years of the strip to work from, and so I was reading the very first uh, images of Flash Gordon that the world saw. Like I was starting from zero, and then I also looked at the Buster Crabbe film serials, which only came out 2 years after the strip did. Like they came out really fast, and they look amazing. Like it's an incredibly faithful adaptation of the strips. So I was looking at those. I was looking at this original, like the most simple version of the canon, and I just thought, let's do this. Let's treat it like it's Batman the animated series. Like we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're just going to reproduce this world, these characters, as you know, like sort of keeping everything that works and then being very minimal and judicious with what we change. So my approach to Flash was he's the perfect guy. He's kind, he's helpful, he's sensitive without being self-indulgent or weak. He's he's kind without being a pushover. He's physically uh, like he's not a Superman, but he can kind of do anything you need him to do. Um, I think about this tweet I saw. It was the question was who would win in a fight between John Wick and Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible, and somebody's reply to it, and I have it saved because it's just flashed to me. The reply is John Wick is pretty inarguably the better fighter, but Ethan Hunt is him, and that's Flash. He's him. Like he doesn't choke, and and he can be beat. He can catch bad luck. Somebody can get the drop on him, but all things being equal, he's if you need Flash to do something, he'll do it or die trying, and he never dies. So uh, I then thought, starting with this guy, let's build a cast around him that has a lot more faults and foibles. Like let's kind of use Flash as almost like a Don Quixote style character, where his singularity of purpose and action gives other characters something to bounce off of. Because in the original Flash story, like the first one from January 7th, 1934, Flash and Dale crash outside of the laboratory of Dr. Hans Zarkov, who has been trying so hard to save the world that he's gone uh, crazy. He's having a manic episode. He thinks they're spies. He pulls a gun on them and kidnaps them into his spaceship because he's worried if he lets them go, they'll like tell on him. Like he's not thinking clearly. Um, and so other versions have made it so that he's more of a kindly scientist. Like they agree to join him. But I thought, no, let's keep that. Let's have him choke. Let's have him crack under pressure, and he does this big thing badly. He kidnaps these two people, um, and he gets over his manic episode, and he returns to lucidity and has this like, what have I done? That motivates his character for years. This guy who still sees himself as the guy that cracked under pressure and potentially ruined these kids' lives. Um, with Dale, she's Dale is not a coward, but she's always like screaming and crying and getting captured and whatnot. Like, and in the original comics, I mean. And again, in subsequent versions, she's been made to be, you know, overtly courageous, no nonsense, fearless in the face of danger. You know, a comparable warrior to Flash. And again, I was like, well, let's take it back to the 30s. Let's have her be scared all the time. Let's have her be anxious and kind of awkward and not super physically gifted, but have her still be heroic. Because I think if you have somebody like Flash, having somebody else who's also brave almost cheapens it. Like cheapens their bravery if they're next to Flash. Um, it's the same reason I don't like adaptations of the Fantastic Four that make Sue Storm also a scientist. Um, and so instead, with Dale, like have her anxiety, her inability to like calm down, be kind of a power. She's incredibly observant. She's uh, her anxiety makes her a pretty good planner. Um, and I think it's really exciting when somebody musters up despite their frailties. So um, I gotta tell you, I was really excited when I pitched all this to King, where I said I want Dale to be scared, I want Zarkov to be crazy, um, I want some of the kings and queens to be villains. Like I wanted uh, Prince Voltan. He's a villain when he first shows up in the comics. I wanted to go back to that. Um, you know, I didn't want Ming to be funny or like a foil. I wanted him to be the scariest, most evil guy in the universe. And it was so exciting to me when I pitched all this to King, and they were like, "Great, we love it. Here's all the notes we have about how Flash should look, but in terms of the story, we love it."
So, what was the most important note that they gave you about taking on the series?
I think it was that um, the very first version of this that I pitched had Flash as a little bit more of a himbo. Like he was always going to be the best guy, but he was kind of like Disney's Hercules. I think would be the best comparison of how I kind of conceived of him. And they said we don't want a funny Flash. We want a heroic Flash. We want him to be straightforward and brave and sensible and smart. And so I adjusted to that really quickly. That's when I decided like let's let's do like Steve Rogers, Flash Gordon, and use him as a foil for the other characters. Um, and I thought that was a really canny note. Like they told me what they wanted, and they were really clear about it, and I respected that. All of the notes have been like that. You know, they wanted Flash to be younger than I initially proposed. They what was it? There was something like um, I pitched an initial version that had Flash in it, not as much. And they're like, well, it's called Flash Gordon. We want him to be in it more. And I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Let's do that. And they wanted Prince Baron to have hair, but other than that, not a lot of restrictions.
Hmm. So, how is it with planning a long running serialized story in a newspaper format? Because essentially it is 7 days a week where you have the main story 6 days, then the seventh is the Sunday. That's kind of like the recap.
Well, it's a complicated structure because um, not every newspaper gets every strip. Some newspapers only get the Sundays, and some newspapers only get the weekdays, and some newspapers only get the bottom two rows of the Sundays. So you have to write a story that can be told in basically 30 panels a week, or a story that can be told in 6 panels a week. And so and then you have to write those Sundays so that they can be read week to week and you still kind of get the story. You need to write the dailies so that if you're skipping the Sunday, you're not missing any connective tissue. So it can be it was certainly a lot to get my head around at first. Um, but you know, I uh I just turned in my 365th strip. I'm a year into it now, and I definitely have a better feeling for that weekly rhythm. And of course, those weekly strips are each part of a 10-week storyline, and I'm getting a better idea for how much narrative that can accommodate. Like, uh, we've had some stories that I think have really filled the space nicely. Like, I think that our first arc is really strong. I think that our third arc, which took place in Phrygia, was a really nice kind of decompressed adventure story. And then you had the arc we had in Sky City, which, for my money, looking back on it, was a little overstuffed. I just put too many things in there. Um, and I think that there's a lot of fun stuff, but I'm looking back at this year and being like, I don't want to put so much stuff in there that the character moments don't have time to breathe, that the audience doesn't get a chance to connect with these people. Um, so it's a learning process, but I feel like I'm getting somewhere with it.
Yeah, and I think definitely the biggest thing that I've noticed when I read it is just that you make it accessible to a wide variety of ages of people where kids can read it, adults can read it, and parents and kids can just read it together. I think that's just such a great thing to have like instill that love of not only the character but also the medium to
Yeah.
people who may not think of traditional comics as their thing.
Well, it would really warm my heart if that was true. If parents and the kids were reading it together, I've seen some posts online about you know spouses that read it together. That's pretty special to me. And yeah, I try to write something that's not too explicit, too gory, but also I try to do something that doesn't talk down to people. People kind of think of Flash Gordon as this hokey thing. In some cases, that's when I kind of polled when I like drudged the internet for what people think of Flash Gordon. That's the thing that kept coming up. They think of him as a cheesy character, but you know what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding, right? So
Mhm.
that we can do something that talks to people on their level, that is exciting. It's like a little bit of they get a little bit of story or spectacle or intrigue or like a clever turn of phrase or something every day. If they can, we can give them that, you know, create a nice high protein story morsel every day. I mean, that's really what we're after here. Um,
Yeah, and I do think that is interesting how you brought up that a lot of people thought of Flash Gordon as very cheesy, very hokey, when he's been really a huge influence on modern day sci-fi. Like Star Wars would not exist without him.
True. Well, not only Star Wars, Superman wouldn't exist. Like so much of what
Hmm.
superhero comics has comes from people pulling from Alex Raymond. Detective Comics number 27, the first appearance of Batman, his pose on the cover is a tracing of an Alex Raymond drawing, Alex Raymond Flash Gordon panel. Um, and and also this gets forgotten, and it's not as represented in later versions of the comic, although it's definitely present in the Sam Jones movie, is the original Flash Gordon comics are like really there's a strong sexuality to them. There's a lot of, I mean, Carrie Fisher showing up in that outfit in Return of the Jedi, that's a Flash Gordon outfit. That's something Dale wears. Um, it's there was this real, kind of kinky element to it that, obviously I'm not interested in having like all of the near nudity in this modern thing. I don't think they'd let me if I did want to do that. But I do think that there's an emotional dimension to that, like an emotional intimacy that, um, that we still should bring to it. And I've had people write in to say like, you know, uh, like I can't put my finger on like why this is horny, but I feel like it is, and that's the goal. Like I want it. I, I want the energy to be there. I want the organs to be there, um, without having it be this overtly sexual thing that can turn off some readers. Because that's the other thing. Like as you know, as cool as the spectacle in some of those old Alex Raymond strips are, some people find it off-putting. The how every woman is a size one in a bikini and see-through skirt, which is an Orientalist look, which is a whole other thing. There's a yellow face dimension. There's an Orientalism dimension. There's a uh, like it's real. Um, like there's some very of its time stuff that puts off some people. There are times when I'm sharing panels from the original Flash run where I show them in black and white instead of in color. Um, and from what I've been able to read, Alex Raymond was not a guy with hate in his heart. It it was largely an of its time thing, but that is something that stands in the way of new readers appreciating it. I hate that I can't show the spirit to just anybody because of Ebony White. Um, and
Mm.
so part of the point of um, revitalizing these old properties is being able to show like what's exciting and enriching about the idea of Flash Gordon without having him fight an evil Japanese space emperor. Um, so anyway, all of which is to say, this is part of bringing it into the modern day, having it maintain the venom that it had when it started out, without the stuff that makes people feel like they aren't supposed to be here.
Honoring its sci-fi pulpy roots while also bringing that edge of mo- touches of modernity that are much needed.
Yeah, because it's funny when like there are some things like I don't think we're ever gonna get to a place in my lifetime where we do a new Fu Manchu. I think that some things are radioactive, where if you take away the stereotypical elements from it, we have nothing left. I do think that that's the case in some cases, but in the vast majority of things, it's about presentation. It's about you know approaching these stories in a humanist way. Because if we can, I mean, part of the purpose behind Lavender Jack, which has a lot of um, gender and sexuality and racial representation that's not normally seen in turn of the century mystery series. Part of the purpose behind that was, you know, doing a version of those stories that everybody kind of gets to be a part of. That doesn't have the only black character be a servant or somebody who has to like bravely endure suffering, or I don't know. There's definitely a place for that, but in things like the world of Flash Gordon, the world of um, these fantastical things, I feel like there's a mandate to remove the the dated elements of that because it's like getting lead out of our toys. Like the lead isn't what made the toys fun. Let's get it out of here so we stop making the kids gray.
Oh, definitely. I think kind of like what he brought up with Lavender Jack, and even with some like Flash Gordon's, the fact that you're operating in a unique world that doesn't need to align with how ours quote unquote tradition is, nor does it need to really be our world in that case. I mean, like with Flash Gordon, it's like it's in space, it's science fiction, you have aliens, you have spaceships. It's like we don't have to align to the quote unquote mandate of normalcy, or at least along those lines.
And I I think that there's great stories to be written about approaching racial issues in space, of course. But I'm also there are a lot of things you can write about. It's not everything needs to be about everything. And I don't know. I do feel like some creators. I should be careful how much I talk about this. But I think that some people can tie themselves into knots being worried about making their stories airtight, or they can be like, oh, it's so hard to think about this stuff. I'm just not going to think about it. Like you need to. There needs to be a middle way where you're trying to be sensible. You're trying to be aware of yourself, but also you let your hair down and you let the chips fall where they may. And if you fuck up, you say, I'm sorry.
So let's talk a bit about the art of Flash Gordon, because obviously Alex Raymond, outside of creative, being the Flash Gordon creator, also being one of the most iconic cartoonists, what other influences are you pulling from with the series?
One word on Alex Raymond. My biggest artistic influence prior to this is probably Will Eisner, and I studied him pretty intensely during my year of doing the Spirit. Lavender Jack is heavily Eisner influenced, um, but Eisner is a very animated artist. He's a very like his stuff is very motion heavy with a lot of kind of impossible things happening where like a person will be like turning a corner and opening a door at the same time. Um, Stuff that's just impossible to physically do, but you can do it because of how he stages it with his like amazing triple jointed figures. Um, Alex Raymond, on the other hand, was a very classical illustrator. He presented friezes, essentially, statuary, um, and so I there is an element of that in my Flash of me trying to approach it more like that, like instead of this being the moment to moment cartooning of Eisner, let's try to do something that's a little more classical like that. Um, so there's that, but I'm also going to play to my strengths. I'm a cartoonist at heart, so Harvey Kurtzman is my Harvey Kurtzman and Jack Kirby are my two biggest. How am I going to approach Flash people? People talk about the Kirby influences all the time, and those are definitely there. But they're there because Kirby had great. Um, I've actually got a Kirby book behind me right there. Um,
I have
Kirby,
that book as well.
it's really something, right?
It really is.
Um, I pulled that out of an old car I had right before it was supposed to go to the junkyard. Anyway, Kirby had a great aesthetic for drawing anything from like ancient stone to advanced technology. He had an incredibly flexible rendering apparatus. Um, and of course, he never drew like an unimpactful panel in his life. Kurtzman, on the other hand, was this wonderful theatrical storyteller. Not only did all of his panels have like an entirely unique profile, an entirely unique silhouette, but also he was able to create tiny moments that felt big. Um, so, studying his war comics, stuff like Corpse on the Imgen, um, is definitely a big influence. Excuse me, a big influence on what I'm doing with whoops, Flash Gordon.
Mhm. Now that you mention it, that is an interesting way of approaching it because it's very much bringing those big Kirby moments while also having the smaller aspects. Because that's basically what a newspaper strip is. It's basically a smaller series of big moments pieced together.
True. I mean, especially the way that we do it. There are other strips that approach more of a moment to moment panel flow, which sometimes means that an action takes a week to execute if it's complex enough. Whereas in Flash, we really try to keep it pushing. We don't try to. On a recent arc, we were on Ming's crashed flagship for like 3 weeks, and by the end of it, I felt like claustrophobic. I was like, I gotta get off this place. I'm tired of being here. I'm tired of drawing this. I but like I could have spent more time in there. I wasn't actually sick of the location. I was just like buzzing to be somewhere else. I'm like, this isn't what the strip is. The strip doesn't stay in one place very long. Like we're always moving in this thing. Um, so yeah, whenever I feel like it's dragging at all, that's when I'm like, all right, it's time for something to happen. It's time to move a story point up, or the classic Raymond Chandler, time for somebody to come through the door with a gun. Because there are definite things that have happened where I'm like, oh, this not really like we're just talking this week, huh? All right, something's going to crash through the wall.
Yeah,
And
no, and I mean, kind of go back to Kirby in a way as well, especially if you look at his New Gods, which is a series that ha- I would say characterize a strong love, more of a obsessive attitude towards, but so much of that is that propulsive action and story. Like so much of it's just constantly going, 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 not really taking any time. And I imagine, especially with that world of Flash Gordon, it's just so much to introduce with so little time.
those original strips, because for the first 10 years or so, like the stuff Alex Raymond was doing, it was all Sunday strips. And God, they would just get so much story across through narration. The original Flash Gordon was a lot closer to something like Prince Valiant than Dick Tracy. Very writerly, very you know, very storybook almost. And when you read the captions in the strip that I do, I'm kind of trying to capture that voice. I'm trying to make it a little more modern, a little more knowing. Sometimes I don't want it to get too stale, but there is this voice of God, like just heaving huge amounts of story and exposition at you really fast in very few words. I actually read The Old Man and the Sea before I started doing Flash, just to get that like Hemingway brevity in my head, because I'm a verbose writer. Um, I will, I love patter, um, and man, we don't have to. It's this isn't Yap Gordon. This is Flash Gordon. Like we got to say what we need to say and keep it pushing. There's a reason why almost every time characters are like talking to each other in Flash, they're like doing something. They're walking somewhere. Because that's just not what the comic is. So yeah, and that's where Kirby comes in. That's where Kirby comes in. It's where Kurtzman comes in. Eisner as well. You know, God, Eisner more than any of them. You read some of his later stuff, like Fagin the Jew, or even just his Contract with God trilogy. Like whole generations rise and fall in like 2 pages, and maybe 30 words are on the page. I mean, he's the god for a reason. He's uh, no matter what else I do, no matter how many other influences I take on, Will Eisner is Will Eisner. On Mount Rushmore, he's Washington.
There's a reason why the awards are named after him.
Damn right.
Hmm.
Uh, I never got a chance to meet him, which is a shame. But I had and continue to have immense respect for him. And of course, I didn't meet Raymond because he died in 1956.
Come on, you could be old and just slowly aging for all we know. That's how you made Lavender Jack.
I would love for that to be the case. Nothing would delight me more than him being like secretly alive, like Brazilian Hitler. Um, but uh, but no, I was very lucky. At Helioscope, I worked with Jeff Parker, who wrote Flash Gordon for Dynamite, as you're well aware, with Evan Shaner and Jordi Belair. And I love Jeff's writing. He's so propulsive. He's such a good, just a you. He would have been a killer pulp writer. He just knows how to keep it clicking, and I was very fortunate to be able to like pick his brain while I was putting this strip together. Because yeah, Jeff is the man.
I mean, could not agree with you more, especially with Doc Shader as well. Like, that's team.
Man, and Shaner goes from strength to strength. That uh, it's really exciting to be a part of like an age cohort of creators who were like watching people that whose work you saw in DeviantArt during the Bush administration become like the next Steve Rude.
I fully agree with that because I'm a bit younger than you. In my case, it's more finding fan artists on Tumblr in the 2010s, and now they're doing like all of this stuff. It's like, what is? It's wild. It's cool. It's just so. It's just so different now.
It is. It is. It's different, and I think it's really great to see like social media for everything else it's done. It's also democratized a lot of access, and you have like I first saw Erica Henderson's work on Tumblr. Um, you have Zoe Tunnel is a writer who I like her because she's very supportive of my work, but also she has this cool, pithy, actiony work that I just know I wouldn't have seen uh, 10 years ago. But I get to
Hmm.
read Blade Maidens on the
It's so
internet.
good.
Yeah, right.
Her and Valentine. What
Yes,
a pair.
I couldn't agree more. And so it's just it's good. There are a lot of great artists out there putting out great stuff, and I know I can be a doom and gloomer sometimes, but I know there's really good stuff ahead. And genuinely, King Features being willing to reach out to me, to Jules Rivera, to Randy Mulholland, to take over some of these older properties, and some stuff coming down the pike that I can't talk about publicly, but I know King is doing. Um, it's really encouraging to see a publisher, a part of the Hearst Corporation, for goodness sake, uh, be looking into the future like this. And uh, the more work I see, Jadzia Alxorad getting, the more great work that I see. I don't know. I'm really excited with the talent pool right now. There's even people I beef with. There's even people I don't like personally who I'm just really excited that their work is getting out there because it's like good for the ecosystem. Um, yeah, no, good times ahead, I think.
Mhm. And with that, I think that is a good time to start wrapping things up. So, Dan, talk a little bit about what more you have on your plate at the moment.
Well, I mean, my main thing, of course, is that there's a new Flash Gordon strip every day of the week. You know, 7/365. We're just about to start our new story arc. It should be not this week, but the next. Um, which is a really good one. We're going to hang out with the Lion Men for a while. It's really I pitched it as like if Studio Ghibli made a Mad Max film, and I think people are really going to like it. Um, I have some stuff coming up that I can't talk about here, but I will be talking about online. If people uh, follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram, I'm at Dan Schkade everywhere. Uh, my name was made up in the 1860s, so there aren't that many of us. So I usually get Dan Schkade whenever I go to a social media. Um, and aside from that, there is more St. John coming. Um, uh, and I think that that is all I can talk about right now. I'm not going to do another Twitter Cops. People ask me to do another Twitter Cops. I'm, I'm, I've tried, and it's not going to happen. Um, Nor am I going to do a Goat Man comic, unfortunately. I thought about doing it. I just can't budget the time. But I promise that at least one of the things that I can't talk about here is going to make people really happy. So happy that they forgive me for not doing a Goat Man comic.
Okay, and how can people support you and your work?
I mean, the best way to support my work is to just read Flash Gordon on Comics Kingdom when it comes out. If you want to subscribe to Comics Kingdom, it's only a couple bucks a month, and you get to read all like the whole catalog of Flash Gordon along with you know the like 3 dozen other strips they have, including Randy's Popeye and Jules's Mark Trail. They're also doing Dick Tracy now. They're doing the Phantom. Anyway,
Oh,
anybody
cool.
who's a fan of old comics, the Comics Kingdom site is a huge resource. And if you sign up, uh, I don't have a code or anything, but I think somehow if you sign up and then read Flash, they know it's from me. Um, Also, keep on commenting that you want a Flash Gordon collection. It couldn't hurt. Other than that, just follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram, and if I drop a piece of news, act really impressed.
Okay, and yeah, second about subscribing to Kingston again. I mean, I do think it's like $2 a month, but I think you get like your first couple weeks free. It's less than a cup of coffee. It's definitely worth every penny of that.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. I think King is being really smart about this.
And with that, I think that is it. Thank you, Dan, so much for being on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.